Welcome back to Digital Bodies. This tutorial is going to show a couple of basic things related to the subdivision plane and how to edit these. So let's start with your non-drawing hand blue thumb button. And actually, we'll take this. Let's go to the purple button with your thumb. And let's go to primitive shapes. And click that twice, and then I want to come to plane. As we set this, basically, as you use your two trigger fingers, your left hand and right hand will control the two corners of this plane. We can set the plane, and now we can navigate around it using our non-drawing hand. And you can see once we mouse over it, it turns red to select it. We can move it around, but I want to select it with my drawing hand, middle finger. And once I have it selected, you can see your left controller, your non-drawing hand controller, blue thumb button gives you what looks like an N and a series of points to be able to manipulate your surface. In this mode, we can scale it in either direction by grabbing these arrows. But what we want to do is turn this into a subdivision object. And once we've done that, we get a new display. We also see that our plane has changed, and we can either select the edges or the points. And as we manipulate these, we can see it change. The other thing that happens is that we can use a couple of these selection aspects on the top. And let's do that. But actually what I'm going to do is I just want to show you a couple of options. So as we select an edge, and on your drawing hand controller, your thumb joystick, you can see what looks like a blue pyramid with blue points and blue edges. As we move left and right, you can see now that blue pyramid has turned into just a simple blue dot. This means the only thing that I can select are the control points. If I move the thumb again, now I can see all I can select are the edges. If I go back again, now it's only the faces. And so this drawing hand thumb toggle is a very useful tool for being able to select some of these things. So for now, let's change it so that we just select the edges. And what I'd like to do is grab one edge, and then with my trigger finger on my drawing hand, click it. And you can see we've added one. And what I want to do is just make kind of 5 or 6 additional edges and bring it kind of back around. Now let's change the blue pyramid to just the control points. And if we select one control point and we bring it close to another control point, we see that it snaps to it. And so once that's done, let's reach to the other side. And again, we can control by our thumb moving forward and back. We can control the size of our selection. Let's select the other control point and let that one snap. So what we see here is a kind of low poly subdivision model. But what subdivision does is that it begins to smooth these things out. So on our left, or our non-drawing hand control panel, we can move this to be on and subdivision low, and we start to see a little bit of kind of jagged edge, but at least a continuous surface. What we see is the cage for the subdivision control points, and then we see a smooth object. If we increase the subdivision level to more, this then gets smoothed out. And so what I would suggest doing now is you can manipulate the edges, but now with this little tube, what we can do is I want to show you the option to auto select the loops And so what we can do is to move your right drawing hand or your drawing hand thumb to just the edges. And with that loop selected, so it's light gray, what happens now is that when we mouse over an edge, we can see the entire edge is selected. So as we move this, that's what starts to happen. But what I want to do is I want to now take this and begin to copy this around. And again, maybe 5 or 6 times. Don't know why I had 2 there. So you should be careful as you click the points. So that they don't overlap on top of one another. And so what we have now is the start of a torus. And what I want to show you is that if I go back now to just control points, I can then connect, basically weld up this object using just the planes, right? We started with just one plane, and as we connect all of these joints, now we have a continuous object. And this is a watertight closed volume. Let's go back to our points for a second. We can manipulate our points and set our object. We can begin to control some of what's happening here. We can start to see the way that the edges are kind of moving through. We can see these edges if we want to work to clarify some of this, right? We can work with either the edges, the faces. If we want to do these continuously, we can select all the faces all the way in a loop. And so this is a pretty great thing. We can also we can turn our subdivision level down. We just see a little bit of kind of faceting there, and we can turn it all the way down, and we get still a rendering representation of this. We turn it off. Now we get our kind of jagged faces. This can be useful sometimes for clarifying some of what we see in a low poly kind of setting, right? We're not distracted by all of the curvaceousness of the object. And we can kind of work on this to clean it up. And we can always come back and turn the subdivision levels back on. And so we get our smooth object. And why I wanted to show you this while we're going to work with planes on this assignment, I want you to understand that the plane is the most basic element, and we can use the plane to build up volume, to build up surface and volume. The other thing that I really, really love with subdivision modeling is that if I go to the face option, which is this one, I can select a face. You see, I can move it around, but I can also delete that face. As that gets deleted, what we see is because of the subdivision algorithm within this cage, this creates a hole because we've deleted that. And so now if I do my auto loop, now I can select, oh, I don't want faces anymore, I want my edges. Now I can select that kind of opening. We see the algorithm giving us a nice round hole there. I can even pull this out. Or what I can also do is I can select it and then I can add a face with my trigger to pull that out. I can do this on the other side. Turn my auto loop off. I can delete this to create another hole. And what I might do is just pull this surface to the inside. I can, using both of my middle fingers, I can also scale this down. And I can copy this loop to the inside and scale it down. And as I move, you can see as I get inside, I can now weld these vertices together, which builds a continuous surface. It now just smoothed it out completely. And now we can see we've got a donut with a hole in it. And this is pretty great in that as we start to control a surface and begin to sculpt a surface, we can delete faces. We can open these up. We can control that a bit. The other thing that I want you to see is that I can add, and I'll come back and do this with the plane in a second, but I can add additional control rings or vertices with my trigger finger. As I add this, you can see between here and here and here and here, there's just one. As I come in and I press my trigger finger, I've added that loop. And so if I want to begin to add detail, I can do that with this object. And if I'm done editing that, I can click my non-drawing head blue thumb button. And now we end up with this as our object, and we can move that to the side, right? We could copy it. And so we can have multiples of those. So let's go back to the plane just for a second and draw one more plane. And I am aware that you can create, in our primitives, that you can create a torus. But what I wanted to show you was the fact that you can take one simple plane as a face and begin to build up topology from that. So once we have our plane, again, we can edit it. We can scale it a little bit, but I'm less concerned about the scale. I want to turn that into a subdivision object. But let's think about building up a simple topography. And here's in a simple way we can see with our subdivision level turned off. And what happens as we turn that on, we get a nice smooth, we get a nice smooth average between the cage, between these points. And so for now, let me turn that back, turn the subdivision level off. And I just want to begin to create a topography. And I'll do that by using my drawing hand trigger finger. And if I want to add one edge, I can do that, but I'm going to undo. If I add the auto select loop, you can see now I can add more edges. I can move this around, and it seems that I'm making multiple edges as I do this. So I can pull that. I think my battery's also starting to die. And so what we can begin to do here weird. Okay, I did have multiple surfaces. I'll just unfold these out. Not really what I was intending to do, but this may happen for you. Now you can see multiple points within here. And so what I would suggest is that you start with a relatively simple grid. And I've got a little unsimple. but we're already beginning to build up a topography here, right? We can see a kind of dip in the middle. And so if we come back to this as a way, we can kind of begin to occupy the space in here, play with some of these dips, but we can also turn back our subdivision back on. And now we can see this become more of a kind of smooth shape. So we can see some control points on the bottom, some on the top. If we want to change this a little bit, we can exit this. And then let's also change this to be, so what we can do is we can change it to we can put it on a layer and make it a little more transparent. And so I'll create a new layer and select this object, put it on this layer. And then let's make it 50% transparent. So when we come back to editing this, now we can see our control points, and that works. If we want to put a hole in the surface, we know we can delete it. If we want to extend that, we can extrude it. For now, though, what I'd like us to do is to work with this plane and begin to build up a topography which will hold the bodies that we're going to be working with. So again, what you want to do is you want to start with the minimal surface, the minimal amount of control points that you need in order to begin to articulate your surface. And remember, you can use edges, you can use the control points, or you can use the actual faces. If you want to add more detail, like let's say I want to have some level of control through the middle, I could add a couple of lines here. If I wanted to have a kind of crease through here. And we can see what that might look like if we go back and we turn on our subdivision. And maybe with it being transparent, that can be a little difficult to really see exactly how the light is hitting. So let's go back to our layers. We can increase that. You can see we get a little bit of shadow, but let's even come back and now let's use our flashlight, and we can even start to have the light begin to graze the surface. And we can use the shadows as a way to start to see what's happening with the topography. So this is a kind of simple way of just looking at what we can do with our surfaces and our ability to begin to manipulate them and begin to add detail and add levels of control. And so what I want you to do is to work through from your sketches and begin to work with surfaces. And really, it's what you don't want to do in this instance is to begin to add multiple planes together. It's much easier to add to an existing plane and just begin to extend it and manipulate it and work with it that way. It's not, I haven't had the best experience with taking one surface and connecting it to another surface. What we want to do is to build this up organically. We can add detail in either direction. And so let's say we want to add detail in this direction. We can click on the edge and you can see we just added another line of points here. The more points you have, the more difficult it becomes to manage this and control this. There are some tools for managing the complexity of that, but for what we're doing right now, you'll see that we've got enough, but we can keep adding lines that run through, or we can even delete those lines. And so if I feel like there's too much detail in one place, I can select that loop and then use the delete key there, and it removes that line. Right? And then we can also, you can toggle back between using your auto select loops and not. Moving faces. adding a closed face, and also deleting those faces. Auto loop on. Once you have the whole thing selected using your two middle fingers on your controllers, you can scale this up or scale it down as well. And if we wanted to close that, you should be able to just grab one edge and let that snap, and let that snap, and then close it. So surfaces, or the plane, is, again, that basic building block of an overall surface. We have a lot of control with it and a lot of ways to manipulate it. And this is where we start to get to the benefits of a subdivision modeling, is our ability to work. And so even that, if you wanted to have a kind of tear in a surface, but be able to seal it back up and then work with it like that. And so it's a really robust, simple tool that we can start to build up very complex geometry, very complex surfaces and volumes from it. And again, remember, like the donuts off to the side, we could also begin to work with closing this back on itself and becoming a volume. Okay, so I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions.